Deep Dive Film School makes no claim of ownership of the film footage used in this episode. The film footage is owned entirely by the copyright holders. Also, we're going to spoil the hell out of this movie, so this is your warning. Welcome to Deep Dive Film School.
Oh, this week we're going to be ending out our stand-up film festival with Bob Fosse's 1974 film, Lenny.
Let's dive on in. Alright everybody, I am Adam Sherlock.
And I'm Adam Palcher.
And if you like what you see/hear, please like and subscribe. You can find us on all the spaces and places that people what?
Find good media, that's right. Follow us on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, of course, is our biggest platform as well. We've also been doing a short series, so there's a little bonus for following us there. Follow us on the shorts and do all that thing.
Yep.
Ending out this festival, interesting festival. You know, all of these movies have some element of romantic comedy to them, which isn't something I necessarily was thinking about when we were choosing this festival.
I mean, relationships. I think relationships plays a really big part.
And that's in every movie, but, you know, you got to have some kind of tortured relationship, I think, a little bit, or have that loss. So it makes sense. But this movie, which I think I'd only seen maybe the first 20 minutes of because I fell asleep when I tried to watch it the first time. Not because the movie was boring or anything. I think I just fell asleep.
Yeah.
So this was basically like I was watching it the first time. I was already excited about it because of Bob Fosse. And I've learned a lot more about Lenny Bruce recently and kind of who he was before I watched this movie. So like kind of understanding his place in the history of comedy. This movie to me emulates exactly what I was hoping every one of these movies would be.
Sure.
when I chose this festival. Now that's impossible to say because Bob Fosse is such a unique artist that you could make anything even close to what he made here. There's so much about this movie that is amazing.
Yep.
I mean, All That Jazz is one of our all-time favorite movies. This is not a far step from that. And it's about a stand-up comedian.
Yes.
There's so much going on here.
I felt like one of the things that kept just going around in my head is I was like, you know, there's these moments where
You have seen this? Or
No, this was my first time.
Oh, wow. Okay.
There's these moments where somebody who is known for one thing steps into a different pool. I'm thinking of, you think of people like Dwight Yoakam or Bjork.
Sure.
When they're acting and you're like, Jesus, you could have just done this for a career. Like you are naturally just like so deeply talented at this thing. And I think Bob Fosse, being known as
you were going Dustin Hoffman there for a minute.
Well, no.
You could do stand-up comedy.
Well, yeah, that too. But I was going to say, Bob Fosse, really known for his musical acts, known for his choreography, known for his direction of musical theater. I mean, his vision when he's directing a film, to me, is on a level of like Scorsese. Like, it is that deeply powerful and confident.
And thought through and
stylized,
but also nonstop pacing. And seeing things you haven't quite seen before, even though this was made in 1974, I think.
But it looks like Raging Bull. Like it is that level of
shot in
just
black
like
and white.
Confidence, jumping back and forth in time.
And it also, there's just so many similarities to not only Bob Fosse in his real life and how he portrays himself in All That Jazz to what Lenny is doing here.
Yeah.
Obviously they ended up in different places and stuff like that, but very tortured souls, very sex-driven souls.
Very unflinching in the representation. Like Bob Fosse, when he's doing his autobiographical stuff in All That Jazz, is unflinching and being like, yeah, I'm kind of a piece of shit. And he did the same thing with Lenny here. I mean, let's talk for a second. Let's take a huge step back from the movie itself, and let's talk about the biopic as a genre and how usually spineless it is and kind
Well,
of
these days,
cornball,
for sure.
right?
I mean, it's been done to death. You get the rise and fall of some great person that
We start
is
with
big in pop culture.
We start with when they're young and there's some tragedy that then,
Yeah.
of course, I think Dewey Cox does such a great send up of that, of just like, I guess it's because of my brother that died and that's how come and you're like, fuck, this is like,
let's
whether,
foreshadow the entire thing right up front. Yeah.
Whether it's Walk the Line or Ray or any of these others. And here...
And there's good moments in some of those movies for sure.
Yeah.
But thinking about those not even being in the zeitgeist when this was made.
Yeah.
Like, and just, how often were biopics made at all?
Yeah.
I'm kind of wondering too. All That Jazz came around. Was this after All That Jazz?
Or I don't remember, but I remember that in All That Jazz, talk about meta, is that Roy Scheider playing Bob Fosse is editing Lenny. It shows him editing the movie.
Right. I forgot about that.
But it's a different movie because there's a different act. Again, talk about Bjork. It's like a Bjork music video where you're like 5 steps inside of a nesting box. But so I would imagine that it came out after. I'm not sure. I mean, he only made 8 movies, and only 2 of them are not about musical theater. This and Star 80. Those are the only ones that aren't about musical
Interesting.
theater.
Well, I think you could see what drew him to Lenny. I think both of them are ahead of their time.
Yeah.
But just going towards Lenny and what the story more is about with this movie, he has this particular sense of humor. We've seen this in the other movies where we never really see him bomb necessarily. There's one scene where he obviously bombs, but
he's basically naked and in a overcoat. Yeah, it's not even a bomb. It's just
it's painful.
It's like
it's a one or two. I mean, it's fucking crazy.
It's like your story about seeing Elliott Smith for the very last time before he died, where you're just like, something's going on with this guy.
Yeah, it's his last show. That's right.
Yeah.
But you can see like his particular sense of humor and his storytelling was ahead of its time, right? And considered edgy, just like Bob Fosse is.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no laugh track here, especially the beginning, where he's just going off, because the way that he plays with time, and he does this in All That Jazz, is he intertwines similar moments from different periods of time, whether it's when he was married, whether it was when he's on stage talking about something or reacting to something, or in this weird kind of documentary interview style that he's like commingling with all of this.
Yep.
And we don't really see the person who's interviewing. I assume it's Fosse.
Yeah. Or a proxy version of him, based upon
but we never see him.
He's
always framed out. You don't really hear him or whatever. But like, he got Lenny at this point, started becoming big because he was that authentic person. He became real, right? And he found himself on stage and kind of got to the point where they're like, how dare you say that, know? And you can see why people like George Carlin or Bill Hicks were influenced by someone like Lenny Bruce
completely
in major ways. And then there's people influenced by them and so on and so forth.
And it changed the entire landscape of stand-up comedy. And I think it led to, you think of this age-old concept of the jester, right? And that like
the clown.
The jester is the only one that can tell the king that he's full of shit, right? Mm-hmm. He gets to, and sometimes he can't. Sometimes he'll still get beheaded for doing that. But more often than not, the jester can speak truth to power in this really interesting way. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's something about that really is instilled in the Lenny Bruce character. And there isn't this real bellwether moment where it happens, right? So it's like in the beginning, he's bad. He is a bad sort of vaudevillian,
still good, though.
Well, but sort of vaudevillian level comedian. His mom was a comedian, and so like he's getting up and doing bits in between strippers and all this stuff.
Yeah.
And then there isn't like some big moment. It's just like as he starts doing it more, as he starts sort of like honing his craft, he just starts getting better, right?
The rooms start changing. They do start adding that laughter, right? Because they seriously like he's telling jokes and he has a beard in most of like this kind of initial opening. But again, they're playing with time. You don't really know
when that is,
that is, or where that is in his career. But watching a stand-up comedian with no laughter is very kind of jarring.
Yeah.
Because, you know, he's doing other stuff in the peripheral and telling these other stories. So it's not really necessarily important, but it's just kind of this interesting choice to like, let's pluck that out of here. I know this is about a comedian, but let's screw the laughter here.
Yeah.
He'll be funny later.
And if we take it out, it turns it more into a rant. I'm thinking about...
no, it does.
If you remember, there's that really disturbing footage at the beginning of the documentary My Best Fiend, where Herzog inserts this footage of Klaus Kinski playing Jesus, I think, and he's just like yelling in German at this crowd, right? And there's like people are like trying to slap him and pull him off the stage, and you're like, what the fuck am I watching, right? Like, is everyone in on the act, or what is this? And there's moments of his stand-up that almost feel like that. Like, you think that they're going to boil over. I mean, there's these moments, you know, we were talking about it before we started here, where he goes through this litany of slurs, right, to the audience.
Well, it's kind of what turned into the 7 dirty words, right? Like, to some degree.
Very
right?
similar. I mean, and I think that
He
there's...
gets blacklisted.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's...
Arrested. And,
obscenity, right? It's an obscenity trial. Like, he gets arrested. You get put in handcuffs for saying the word cocksucker, right?
Yep.
And you go... You know, a lot of times we don't think there are these moments that make the 1960s both feel like a million years ago. Oh, well, it's one of two things. Either it makes the 1960s feel like a million years ago, or it makes you realize how just barely, just in our backyard, things were that fucked up, right?
Sure.
That you could arrest a person for saying a word to other adults, you know, in a nightclub. There will be cops waiting in the wings to see if you say the word again.
Absolutely. And a lot of this is in the 40s and 50s too. It's not, you know, like him coming up is in that.
Yeah, that's
that
true.
Underground diners bar scene.
What's so amazing about after he's been arrested the first time and the cops are waiting in the wings is that he shows that he's so deft and so smart that he does the same bit and is so fucking dirty without ever saying the word.
It's great.
He removes the word and it makes it worse.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And the cops are just sitting there and they're so angry. And it's just, it's very punk. It's very pre-punk punk, right?
Oh, like absolutely anarchist style. Like, fuck you. For sure. But he's right too. And I've heard that example before by other comedians. Like, the cleaner you try and make something, it actually sounds way worse than if you actually just...
Because now the person is inserting it in their brain, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and to go to your point earlier when you were talking about this interesting juxtaposition, both in playing with time as well as just letting his rants kind of push along the movie, you know, from an editing standpoint, it's like Fosse built a new way of doing the J cut where you have dialogue hanging over as we're transitioning through time and space, or the reverse, right? And so what's amazing about it is that
it's like a long J.
Yeah, it's like a real long J. And what's amazing about that is it allows us to see things that, again, like, biopics are usually pretty spineless, especially in the later years.
Well, they got to cover a lot of ground in a short amount of time, right? You need to get from A to B. Like, you can't tell the life of Forrest Gump without starting at the beginning, right?
Right.
Like, you know,
but we don't do any of that here. I mean, we start with him as already a comedian, and then he talks about things that happen in his childhood. But what I think is interesting is that in these moments where it doesn't pull these punches, and like his new wife and him get in a horrendous car accident.
Oh, out of nowhere.
And while she's in the hospital, he sleeps with the nurse.
Oh, man.
Right? But, which again, you go, I fucking hate that guy, right? Like, that is the
first
lowest...
time you hate him in the movie.
Yeah, that's the lowest thing you could do. But we then cut to him going, oh, man, sex. The fucking sex thing. You know what I'm saying? And then he starts going on his rant about it, and we're with him again.
He can pull these little puzzle pieces from wherever in his acts he wants.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm sure a lot of this is pulling from his actual act. You know, I'm sure this is word for word what he says in a lot of his acts. I know when he starts reading his you know, court papers and stuff like that. That's like a kind of famous thing that he was. And
and the wheels start kind of falling off the bus.
He went on to do, and you know, I do want to talk about his wife because they do interview her.
Honey,
yeah, and she's great. Yeah. It's the actress Valerie Perrine. I remember her from the very first Superman movie.
That's who she is.
She is the hot blonde that's Lex Luthor's
That's Lex Luthor's
sidekick.
yes.
That's the first thing I thought when I saw her.
Okay, thank you.
But she's great. She's wonderful here, and she has a very troubled life, and we build up and kind of find out more and more about her and their relationship, and it's really laid out so beautifully because you love their relationship. Obviously, there's parts where there's where he becomes who he is, and she becomes who she is, and becomes this huge drug addict, and he also falls into that and goes back and forth. But he's also raising their kids their kid. But even at the beginning, Fosse does this amazing thing of what you're talking about, him telling a story, and then just showing them hanging out, like slowly growing and together in their relationship building without saying a word. Without even talking about it in his stand-up or whatever it is. Like he just does so much show don't tell with the way that he makes this movie, and it's how all that jazz is made too. You cram so much in there. Same with Scorsese, you cram so much in there. Same with Oliver Stone, right? Like there's a million things that they're taking from, but man, Bob Fosse,
it's nuts. It's nuts. I mean, it defies expectations over and over again. You think when his agent calls him and says, hey, honey's a slut, she's all over town, you're like, oh, this is going to cause some drama. It doesn't. No. Lenny just digs his heels and he's like, I don't fucking care. She already told me all that, right?
That's when he asked her to marry
her.
Exactly. And is my mom behind this? That's the best part.
And then you go, is there going to be all this tension with the mom? Mm-hmm. And then we have this beautiful, incredibly charming lunch or dinner table scene.
One of the best scenes in the movie.
And again, very Scorsese. The camera's just moving around that table, and you've got grandma there, and you've got all the jokes and all the stories.
Then what was all that about then? Was
it's a misdirection.
You're it totally is. It's totally a misdirection. But you're expecting this like tension of who she is and how long have you known my son before you married him? And all of this stuff. But she turns out to be just the best
delight
ever.
A delight. And then she's like, don't step all over my lines, I'm on, like I'm performing, Lenny, like step back, right? And then she's telling all the stories, and then he does the dick dick to his grandma thing, and I was just like, it felt so real. Like it didn't, like, that's Dustin Hoffman, but it doesn't feel like you're watching a movie.
No, absolutely. And that was my next question for you, is what can you say about this Hoffman performance? Because it's something that should be talked about more.
Oh my God.
And his, like, he obviously has a ton of amazing shit.
But people talk about The Graduate, and I'm like, nah, Lenny. Like,
Graduate's great.
It's great, but holy shit, man.
This is more my kind of movie than The Graduate, even though The Graduate's fucking awesome.
Yeah, it's amazing.
But like this performance-wise is way better.
Yeah.
Like,
he's electric.
He dives deep in here, and like, there's also another great rendition of Lenny Bruce in the Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, if you've ever seen that show on Amazon, which is a great show that really does dive in about stand-up comedy as well, but more the kind of the Joan Rivers experience side of it more than the Lenny Bruce. But Lenny Bruce is a character in the show.
Oh, cool.
And the guy who plays him is awesome as well. So I don't know. They do show a lot of the drugs and the debauchery of this kind of celeb nighttime scene when they do start getting big, when he does have more power, more control. He's got these rooms. He's demanding 30% of whatever, like he can kind of just say, fuck you, and be that anarchist even more because he's in such high demand.
Well, and piss all over the guy who got him there, who wanted him to keep his act clean. That was sort of his mentor. Like when he was like, when he felt like he was in the right spot to be like, like, Lenny, you don't have to work dirty. Like, you could do this other thing. And he's like, okay, thanks. And then he basically just sabotages it anyway and is like, fuck you. And like, the repercussions never come back to him. Now,
I mean, he eventually drives himself crazy.
Well,
all the legal trouble.
Well, and I want to talk about that really quick, because it was the thing that I was left with the most, that I kept thinking about after I finished watching the movie, that I thought was really interesting, is that it seems like his downfall, and the movie does a really good job of portraying this. It seems like that his downfall is, you look at somebody like George Carlin, and, he was obviously very successful when he was younger. had the seven dirty words, like had all, had a place for my stuff, had all that kind of a thing, and was pretty well known. And then kind of got a little watered down, and people were like, oh yeah, Carlin's kind of a hack, and like they kind of he wasn't popular anymore after the
He just
70s,
got
right?
angrier.
And then he found his anger, right? And when he clutched at his anger, and then all of a sudden it wasn't like the groovy 70s bell-bottom George Carlin, it was the slicked back ponytail George Carlin of the 80s and 90s that was like fucking mad, and he suddenly had a whole new act. But it was in part because he grabbed a hold of that anger and turned it into comedy. I think what Lenny did is that he just started talking about how he, like, the things that he believed that were wrong in society.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't think that it was his idea. He thought it was the truth. And that's the difference, is I think that he thought it was the truth, and it's why
sad there's a difference there, but yes,
there is a difference.
I know what you're saying.
And what happened is that every time he went to court, he was like unrelenting, and not because he was trying to be a martyr, but because he was like, Judge, just listen, let me, if I could do my act for him, if I could do my act here in the court, you'll get it, you'll understand.
You can't soundbite me out of this.
And over and over, people are like, no, it's obscene. What don't you understand about this? And he's like, I know, but listen, hear me out, because this is the truth, right? And I think that
and there's a freedom of speech element to this as well, which was his biggest defense.
Right. But I think it broke him, because I think that he kept being disappointed by the system, because
100%.
he felt that what he was saying was the truth. And other people are like, no, I fundamentally disagree with you. And he's like, I know, but listen. And they're like, no, it's not. It's you'll never convince me. And I think that's the most tragic piece of this.
Oh, for sure. He falls hard too. And they easily could have copped out to the drugs and stuff like that.
Right.
And that is a part of it, but it's never like the thing that ultimately kills him, right?
No.
It's when he starts defending himself in court and firing lawyers and trying to like do what you're saying and just kind of over explain, like, no, you don't get it, but no one wants to listen to him.
Yeah,
they just think everything he says is going to be obscene.
Yeah, they just think he's wrong, right? And like you said, he basically turns himself into a lawyer.
Yeah. And just like, what is dirty, right? Like what is considered dirty? I think obviously the bottom of the barrel is this scene where he comes out, and this shot was taken from Fosse. Some student in the balcony was filming this the whole time, and it is a oneer, like I mentioned before, and he comes out and he's doing crank or whatever with his girlfriend right before, and he comes out with a raincoat and one sock, and it's like the biggest bomb, but holy fuck, like, he's interacting with the crowd, like, but Hoffman's performance here is insane.
Yeah, he's hostile, but he's also lost, and he's really sad
and trying to be funny, but nothing really comes out funny.
Yeah,
it kind of remanded me of that scene in Big Sick a little bit, where he just goes off. Right?
Yeah, the worst,
right after
YouTube's worst stand-up act. Yeah, it is an incredible scene, and it's so sad, and yet he was so famous by that point. It also reminds me of, some scenes from something like Man on the Moon.
Sure.
Where it's like, once he was so big, people would go and they would be quiet and be respectful and watch the act, even though it's a person drowning. Because they're like, I saw Lenny Bruce. And it's like, yeah, he's super fucked up and he's dying or whatever. But
I think people wanted to like still go to his shows just to see if he was going to get arrested. Right?
Exactly.
Like that's how he sold tickets for a while. And he knew it.
Yeah. It really became that. Well, and I mean, it all became spectacle. I mean, let's talk about the slurs scene, it's so interesting to see it now, when we are in even such, we've gone across the Rubicon to the other side, right? So if we were in an age when Lenny Bruce was talking about all of these ethnic slurs, that at that time he's saying, let's take the power away from the word.
Yeah, that's his big thing. It creates the suppression of the word, gives it power, right? The violence and the viciousness.
Yep. And that if you could go all the way to the others,
just normalize it.
Yep.
Almost.
But then the problem is that now we're in hyper critique or hypercritical version of that, where it's like to even quote and utter some of those words, we're so protective of it, right? And it's a really interesting
It's like, is it a
argument.
brave scene to have in the 1970s? No, obviously there's a lot of stuff going on in that time.
Yeah.
But like, how many people were actually saying that stuff out loud?
Right.
Especially in a movie or on stage.
Yeah, completely. Well, and what I found really interesting also is that in another one of his later, in fact, the one where he got arrested for saying cocksucker, he was defending a friend. He was telling a story and defending a friend of his who was gay. Which again, you go, yeah, at that time, like that's pretty gutsy, right? Mm-hmm. That's pretty gutsy to be like, hey, this is fucked up. Like, we shouldn't treat people like this just because they happen to be gay. And so I just thought that was really interesting.
The reason he becomes so big and so impactful is because he was becoming socially relevant, and he was becoming his words did mean something, and people wanted to see what he had to say because no one had ever really talked like this before, or which is why he was getting arrested. But that's also, any press is good press.
Well, and then you turn it, but then it's the snake that eats its own tail, right? Sure. Because at some point you're not even doing the thing anymore, because all you're doing is referencing your own
version of it.
Yeah, or just you're referencing the news that you made the first time around instead of having something new to say, some new observation. But
for sure, and he does, especially at the beginning, go through a time of wanting to hide his Jewishness. He changes his name. Lenny Bruce isn't his real name.
Yeah.
And there's certain things he won't talk about on stage, but once he gets to that point, he has that reference now.
Yep. It's an incredibly powerul movie. And again, I just think that Bob Fosse is a hell of a director.
It's really hard to describe him as a director because, I do think Scorsese is actually a pretty apt comparison. I'm sure Scorsese fucking loves Bob Fosse.
I'm sure, yeah. I'm sure.
And the Raging Bull comparison was perfect. And I just didn't really know what to expect from this movie because I knew it was a little bit artsy, but knowing it was Bob Fosse, I'm like, let's go. And then we're talking about stand-up comedy.
Yeah.
I have to say, the scene for me in the movie is when they're in court. I think he's in court. This is one of the first times he's in court, and they're playing his act over. Mm-hmm. So they do get to play his act at some point. They're playing it, and it's just the camera scanning the whole room, listening to his act,
faces.
And it's just kind of this slow pan, and he's in it a little bit, and you can see people chuckling, and then you see the jury and all this stuff, and it's just this very basic pan and scan kind of thing, but as you're listening to it and his points being made as it's playing, and he knows it, even though it may not work out that way.
It might not land.
And then you get the lady who's just staring him down.
Well, it's contextual, right? Yeah. I think that's what's so interesting is like that. I loved that scene too, and I'm so glad that you mentioned it because it is like, okay, in a smoky nightclub at midnight when you're super loose, it has one meaning, but like there's shit that we, after we're a little bit unbuttoned on this show and have had a couple of beers, there's stuff that I've said that I'm like, if you suddenly played that at a Monday morning staff meeting at my work, I'd be like, oh God, right? And it's kind of the same thing where you're just like, contextually, it's completely different inside of a courtroom, right?
For sure. No, absolutely. Yeah. And that this being your life and what you're paid to do.
Yeah.
We do this for fun.
Yeah.
He was getting paid to do this and filling rooms, but he was the deviant, right?
Yeah.
He was the pawn, even though he wasn't hurting anyone, which is what I think ultimately drove him crazy, is that he was perceived that way.
Yep.
But he's like, I'm not hurting anyone. I'm just speaking truth.
Yeah. And people not believing that truth crushed his spirit, right? And that's what killed him. And I think that the movie does a fantastic job of showing that.
Wow. Can you believe this movie was made in 1974?
No, it's so fucking relevant.
So
like
what a film, though.
Relevant.
What a film. And, spoiler, they actually show the very last shot is like a real picture of him.
Mm-hmm.
No thanks. I didn't need to see that.
Well,
I
and
get why they did it, but like,
well, and I think that the thing that's really interesting too is that real photo of his dead body, the negatives of it were bought by his agent and kept so that they wouldn't end up in any newspapers or anything. So I don't know if this movie's the first time that those were officially shown.
yeah,
They may have been though, but
killed by the system, man.
yeah, man.
I don't know. He kind of becomes hopeless. You know, it's kind of sad. But again, Carlin kind of got that to that point too. You know, you spit these truths for years,
Yeah.
and people stop listening, or nothing changes, and you're like, fuck it.
He died.
Humanity and groupthink suck.
He died when he was 40. He was 40
know.
years old.
That's crazy.
Crazy. Younger than either one of us.
Wow.
It's nuts.
All right, well, that was a hell of a way to end the festival. Thank you, Bob Fosse. What a movie! What a film!
We do have
so happy
we do have a
Yeah.
forgotten gem to tag on to the end of this. In 2 weeks, we'll be reviewing Punchline,
Yes.
the Sally Field and Tom Hanks film.
Yes, very excited to watch that.
But next week for Halloween, we are going to be doing that one scene
Yes.
from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Leatherface.
One of my favorite movies.
All right.
All right.
Please like and cut this out.
Yep.
All right. Yeah. Please like and subscribe. Find us on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram. Those are our most active channels. We'll see you next week.
Bye, you guys.